Good afternoon, and thank you for taking the time to attend the session this evening. The presentation, as Professor indicated, we will talk a little bit about the Constructability Review benefits for highway projects, and I would like to acknowledge my co-authors, Roy Sterzel and Kyriakos Anaridis, who are both PhD students, and Professor Tim Taylor, who is sitting with us. Now, the idea behind this project came out from a couple of elements that we talked a little bit about before, and the idea is that every project that we develop has as an objective to come up with a solution that's going to be both beneficial to the project and at the same time financially sound. And that creates the idea that we need to come up with cost-efficient solutions, something that we will be able to save money and at the same time deliver projects on time and on schedule. At some point, the previous decades, there was an idea about value engineering, and the idea behind that has been that we're trying to identify elements in a project that they can be either reduced in cost or sometimes be eliminated if they don't seem to be adding any value to the final project. And the concept with that has been extended to a number of different highway projects that we are utilizing right now. Another idea that came about with construction projects was the post-construction reviews, when once you finish the project, then you can go back and look at how you constructed it, identify areas where some additional benefits can be materialized, and once you have done that, then you develop a database of lessons learned so you will avoid the same mistakes in the future. So that's, again, those two elements gave a little bit of an impetus in our work. Now, the constructability reviews, it's a relatively recent phenomenon that we have started implementing in the industry, and the idea behind it is that we want to look at things before the project is actually constructed, so we can identify areas where benefits can be materialized and address issues that they can be preventable or they can be prevented. So what we typically do in this case is we'll look at the project at different stages throughout the project development process. We identify either errors or omissions or other elements that they may have an impact at the end of the project and avoid any potential task orders or the need for potential task orders, and based on that make the appropriate changes and identify those elements. What's very critical here is obviously the timing of the reviews, and most of us who have been involved partially or fully in the construction industry, we can understand the concept that if I catch an error or a mistake very early on in the project, it will take me very little money to fix it. But as the project moves through that stage, and eventually when it gets into construction, any mistakes can be very costly mistakes. So in this case, you need to be able to be proactive and do a lot of that kind of a checking early on in that process. The Kentucky Transportation Cabinet had developed a constructability review database and form that goes along with that, where we actually look at projects at different stages during the project development process. We categorize different errors that they are potential, and we have 4 major categories that they deal with: the design of the project, its drainage, the pavement design, and then a number of different sort of other categories. And then, as you can see, within each one of those elements, there's specific aspects of the project that they are looked at to make sure that once it goes from the design into the plans and eventually into construction, any potential errors are caught early on in the process and then eventually avoid any mistakes. So the problem, though, with that process, even though we have initiated this about 7 or 8 years ago, is that it's not very systematic. It's done on an ad hoc kind of a fashion. It's done by one reviewer, so there's one person who reviews the entire project. And then the problem with that is that not all people have the same expertise. So if I have somebody who is familiar with pavements, his focus will be in pavements. If I have somebody who's familiar with the geometric alignment of the project, then he will focus on that. So we have somewhat of an uneven review process for those elements. The last thing that created the need for this study that I'm going to describe in a minute was that our engineers need proof that if we do that more often, if we do it in a little bit more systematic process, there will be benefits that they can be materialized, and it's worth the time and the effort that one may need to devote to doing that kind of an approach. So what we've done in this case, we went through a case study selection process where we identified a group of case studies that we looked, that they have been through the process of the review, and we identified based on the cost of the project and the type of the project that it was going to be constructed. In Kentucky, we have something that's called a joint inspection, which is the point when the plans are somewhat final, it's the almost final, and then you have the construction folks get involved, and they both of them examine the project and the plans and make sure that any issues that they may be correctable at that point are actually corrected. So we looked at projects that they had a lot of comments, so they created enough of a database so we'd be able to review that. And we try to look at projects throughout the state, because the state has, on the eastern part, it's more mountainous. In the western part, it's a little bit more flat, so there's a different of a type of a project that you might have in each one of those areas. We've identified 9 different projects that we eventually evaluated. Some of them were new construction, some of them were widening of the existing facility. You can see there's 3 different projects that they look for replacing a bridge or a sequence of bridges, and they varied in price from a couple $100,000 all the way up to about $50 million. So again, we try to cover as much of a spectrum as possible. Now, the way that we evaluated our benefits was basically looking at how much savings we will be able to capture from those benefits over a 5-year period, which was mainly their construction. And we've done that in 2 different ways. One of them was at the project level, so we looked at globally what happens with the changes or the change orders that they may be as a result of that project. And then we also looked at the comments, so we looked at each one of the comments that we received on each one of the projects, and we looked at that in 2 different ways. The quantitative, there were comments that you were able to say, if I'll increase the amount of guardrail that I will put, and if I catch that error on time, I will be able to save X thousands of dollars, while others were more of a qualitative nature. It's something that may have an effect, but there's no way that I can actually put a dollar value to that particular element. So at the project level benefits, what we've done is that we looked at the change orders for this particular project, which have been as a result of the particular comment that it was made, and we identified that with projects that they were able to go through the process without that kind of a review. So when you look at the projects that we reviewed and all projects that they were not reviewed, the magnitude of the change orders is not that great. So in those that we reviewed, it was about 3.5% of the cost of the project, while those that they were not reviewed, it was about 4.5%. And you can say, for a 1% change in the cost or in the change orders, you don't have to go through that process. But if you look, though, on those that they have been completed instead of those that they may still be in the process of design or preliminary planning, the savings are significantly higher. So those that they were reviewed, the reduction in the change orders were only about 3% of the budget, while the others, they remain about 4.5%. And we estimated about $500,000 annual savings for that 5-year that I talked about earlier. And again, mind you, these are only the quantitative, because there are also qualitative benefits from the comments that we were not able to put a dollar value. So when we looked at the, as I mentioned before, we looked at every one of those comments that we received. We identified, how much money they will be able to save, and we looked at two different major categories. The first one is whether a particular item was omitted. So, for example, if we needed some additional signage and that the plans did not reflect that, that would initiate a change order for adding that particular signage, or a quantity change. So instead of needing 1,000 feet of a guardrail, I might need 1,500 feet of a guardrail, so that creates a quantity change. We had about 140 comments in the 10 projects that we've evaluated, and almost half of them, they were broken in two different categories. Either they were very low, so less than $2,000, so there were small changes that they needed to happen, and as you can see, that's about a third of the comments. But we also had 8 comments that they were more than $10,000, and those accounted for more than 85% of that 500,000 that I mentioned earlier. So the remaining of the comments were between those 2,000 to 10,000 category. When we looked at the qualitative, we look at two different elements, and the idea behind it is that if that comment or that item was not caught during that review or the constructability review process, what kind of an impact it would have in the final project. And we've categorized them in 3 major categories: low, medium, and high. Low meaning that there would be some kind of a cost, but it wouldn't incur any either dollar values or time issues. Medium, obviously those go up, and then high, if that was the case, then it would have had both cost and time repercussions. When we looked at the comments, what we found that the majority of them were low, so that meant that even if they went undetected, they may have not been much of an issue. But then when you start looking at the medium and the high, you have about 30% of those comments that they would have an impact both on the cost as well as in the time delivery of the project. Now, in order for us to be able to start looking at things a little bit more systematically, what we decided to do is that look at those 10 case studies that we have and evaluate the potential issues that they may arise, and in order for us to be able to predict how much money I will save if I have to do this on a continuous basis and in a more systematic manner. So in this case, we've identified 6 different variables. We looked at the error type. Remember in the beginning I talked about whether it was a design or a pavement or some other. The category type within each one of those 4 major error types, there were different categories that we looked at. The severity, which was again characterized as low, medium, or high. The quality level that we talked a few minutes ago, the number of comments, and the construction estimate. So we wanted to see all of those variables and determine which one of those may be able to predict how much money we'll save in the event of continued constructability reviews. We came up with a regression equation that has a relatively high R-square, about 0.6, where we looked at the number of variables that they seem to be statistically significant, talk about the quality level, so you can identify whether it will have some kind of an impact, the number of the comments that it received, and the comment type, so whether that was a particular category of a comment that we received. So depending on what we looked, and we were able to predict, if you will, the amount of savings or the cost savings that you will have based on that project. So the issues that we ran into this one, it was the frequency of the comments seemed to be an indicator of issues, but at the same time the quality of the comment plays an important role, and one might say the more comments you have, the more difficult or the easier it will be to be able to identify those kind of changes. But at the same time, we have been able to identify that there are benefits that they can be materialized, and you can look at that in a little bit more effective way. So in summary, what we found was that the Transportation Cabinet's database demonstrated that we have put the initial blocks for that continued structural review of projects, and that constructability review can help along those areas. We've recommended that we do that in every single project instead of select projects that they may be because of either for political reasons or because the cost, the budget is very high. And what we are starting to see is that the benefits do exist. For this case, we were able to quantify in 10 cases approximately $500,000 per year. If we start doing this in all of our projects, we anticipate that the benefits will be significantly higher. What also we can capture here, and that's something that we we're not able to gain more qualitatively as opposed to quantitatively, is that the quality of the project gets better with the reviews because you identify errors, you don't have change orders, and you are not requiring to do anything else. So where we go with this in the future, we anticipate to increase our database, and obviously with more data we will be able to go back to our model and start looking at some additional elements that we might want to do with that. So I'll stop here since my time is up, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.